Attitudes and conceptions of addiction and mental health have not always been where they're at today. With that said, it's important to note that sadly there are some similarities to the past and present in terms of stigmatization, attitudes, research methods, and more. The article I chose to analyze and elaborate on is called Reimagining Addiction by Sally Marlowe. The major focus from this article is about the Narcotic Farm, which originated in Lexington, Kentucky in 1935. The aim of this institution was to try and shift the way addiction has been dealt with from a criminal justice issue to one of human health. Researchers came together here to aim to find a cure. The government at the time still had a punitive perspective and viewed addiction as a fault in character and moral decision-making. At this institution, they would have voluntary test subjects who would be given drugs, but often the ones the individuals had an addiction to previously. They were closely examined before the use, during, and then afterwards, especially during the process of withdrawal. Although a lot was discovered and many theories were created from the research done, it did not come without much human suffering due to unethical conditions in the context of the farm. It was here where the discovery of harm reduction strategies such as methadone maintenance for heroin dependence was discovered. Patients were given incentives for being so-called test subjects, but a lot of people that would come into the facility, I would imagine, are not in a very healthy state of mind because of the possibility of the concurrent disorder. So they were, most likely a lot of them weren't capable of giving proper informed consent. The Narcotic Farm stayed open until 1974, after a new ethical code was administered into society. So the building now serves as a federal prison. So the article goes to explain that there is still no clear definition of addiction. It is now known that the cause of it differs so vastly from person to person and is very subjective in many ways. Although the initial goal of the Narcotic Farm was to find a silver bullet cure, we now know that it's really not appropriate to think in terms of there being a cure for it. It is treated more so as something that needs to be monitored and treated as a lifelong affliction. So it's like a chronic issue, similar to many issues correlated to mental health. It does, of course, vary in terms of different approaches, but the general consensus among specialists and healthcare professionals is that mental health and addiction problems should be treated as something that affects your whole lifespan. The article demonstrates some of the animosity that occurred in the past in terms of gaining insight and awareness that we presently have about addiction. I think in the beginning, the idea of addiction was thought of in a very narrow way, and researchers didn't acknowledge the reality of many factors in a person's life that affects the person's drug use. One factor that I feel is major in addiction is the government and attitudes in a given society. Even to this day, many places have a backwards mindset in terms of criminalization and hostility towards drug users, not to mention a lack of awareness of the helpfulness of harm reduction initiatives and programs. There is still limited research and knowledge in terms of treating the addiction epidemic. The article goes to portray a substantial message about how the past was a time of turbulence and uncertainty in the forefront of addiction research, particularly during the time of when the Narcotics Farm was active. This was actually something I have never heard about before until now. This was due to many views from people which didn't really fully grasp the depth of addiction. And many people did, and still do, see it as a choice rather than something that consumes someone's entire existence. The realization that people addicted to substances maybe initially were drawn to consuming it, but over time they might no longer even enjoy taking it or want to take it, is related to an article we read for homework in week 5 called "You Don't Always Like What You Want." What does that mean? Since addiction is such a broad area of study, it is a bit of a difficult subject to fully explain. The article explains that the wanting system of the brain is mediated in the nucleus accumbens. However, the liking circuit of the brain is found in the central pallidum. It's too simplistic to think that dopamine is the only aspect involved in pleasure and wanting something. It is baffling that many humans seem to want things that later possibly bring them discomfort, such as eating. You would think it is. But the reminder of how the two systems are not interconnected can clarify this, however. I was drawn to the article because the first 3 words, the narcotic farm, sounded really bizarre to me, and I was intrigued to try and figure out what this was and how it related to where we are now in addiction research. As it turns out, it was much stranger than I could have imagined and a little bit disturbing. I try to remind myself that this took place in an era much different than our current society, but it's also strange to realize that a lot of the research that was done on people ended up harming them, changed our society, and moved us forward with treatment options for individuals in current society. They ended up learning about the meanings of tolerance, withdrawal, and how relapse is not an end-all to recovery. It is major in helping clients with major feelings of guilt in terms of relapse, which I learned basically means to move in the opposite direction in the stages of change in week 2 of this course. Prior to people knowing about these stages, people must have felt so much worse about their relapses, with the added stigma from shame received from people of authority and most of society in general. I am glad that this approach did also serve the purpose of changing the purely punitive ways addicts were treated in the past. It served as a stepping stone to try and see the whole person and not just a criminal. I am very curious how the world would see addiction if many of these tests and researches weren't done in the past. The complex nature of addiction is still studied today. I feel there are still improvements that can be made. To continue bettering the field of helping addiction-based problems and people suffering with this, I find a good idea could be to study individuals, but more in a way of better getting to know people and the root cause of the addiction. Triggers are major components of addiction as well. It is comforting that so many institutions have changed for the better to accommodate people with addictions and help them in compassionate, caring, and non-hostile ways. Luckily, we did come a long way from where we were before, and hopefully it will continue to improve. That is my hope for addiction and how it's seen in the world today.